So, the issue that we're discussing today is about being deregistered. So, what now? It's been hosted by Community Networks Aotearoa. I'm the CEO of Community Networks Aotearoa. My name's Ros Rice, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you two people that we work with a lot, actually, here in Wellington. One is Louisa Joblin, and Louisa is a principal. I don't know what a principal is, but you're a principal at Moran Law, so you're a lawyer and you do a lot of work in this area. So thank you so much for giving up your time to talk about these issues. And the second one, just as important, Rachel Woodhouse, who we also do a lot of work with. Rachel's senior partner at the Bank of New Zealand. So for those of you who have deregistration issues or are going to be talking to people in your area about what is likely to happen now and what your questions are. Um, uh, One of the big issues is losing access to your bank accounts and your assets. So both those questions can come up. Now, you may have questions. So what I'd like to do, I've got Patrick here. He's going to be taking a record of questions. And what we'd like you to do is, as questions come up, just put them in the chat, and Patty will let us remind us and tell us what the questions are. Is that all right, Patty? Does that work for you? Great. Thanks, Patty. So welcome, guys. Louisa, you want to say anything to get this started or talking about, what you do?
Oh yeah, certainly. Well, so I don't know what a principal is either, although I told my children that I'm the principal and they thought that was quite fun. So I work at Moran Law here in Wellington. It's a boutique law firm, and I specialise in not-for-profit law. So what that means is that a lot of my clients are not-for-profit organisations. So we help them with all manner of things, including just kind of general advice. But a lot at the moment has been obviously focused on society's changes. So I've been working with societies since legislation even came into effect, and in the last couple of months with many who were scrambling to get things done in time. We're now kind of just watching and waiting to see what this new phase looks like. I personally haven't been inundated with requests for help, and I think that speaks to the fact that the people who weren't able to re-register in time, many of them weren't able to seek legal advice, or their resource constraints meant that they weren't coming to instruct someone like me in Moran Law. But so very happy to be here today to talk to you about what we know and what we've learned and what we don't know as well.
Thanks. And Rachel.
Good morning. So Rachel at BNZ, and I look after the not-for-profit team here at Bank of New Zealand. And while we look after quite complex not-for-profit clients, we also consult and have a say for the wider bank for all clients at Bank of New Zealand who are in this sector. And we've done quite a lot of work to ensure that wherever an incorporated society touches the organisation, that our teams have information to assist, and we've done things like updated our website. So been quite involved over the last year, and like Lou, I can say we haven't had a lot come through after the date, which is interesting, but we also had by far the majority of our clients get across the line in all sectors. So certainly our percentage of those who haven't is quite small, which is great from our perspective. Yeah.
Cool. So I thought maybe I'd just get started with a few of the questions that we would be interested in what you have to say. So one of the things that the company's office has been saying to people is, don't worry if you deregistered. You can apply to restore and you just pay us a fee of, I think it's $205. Now, my question is, there are groups out there who were trying to get themselves registered way before, well, days before the final date, but couldn't get through because the company's office wasn't set up for the volume of traffic. So should NGOs pay when late re-registrations are due to the company's office fault?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I certainly, if someone was coming to me and asking about that for their organisation, I'd be saying there's an argument to be made. You might as well request that of the company's office. I think we knew for a long time that there was likely to be a big volume towards the end, and technology did what technology does when websites get overwhelmed. And I understand there were also some more technical issues around making sure that you had authority to actually make the changes in the back end for your society. So I think if your organisation's incurred that fee, despite reasonable attempts to re-register, and especially if you can show that you have a record of we had a call at this time and we sent an email at that time, I'd be asking to have probably not that fee waived, because I think it's a manual, an automated rather process, so you will have to pay to get it to go through, but be seeking some kind of reimbursement for it. And actually maybe that's a time where you get some legal advice, and a letter on lawyers letterhead pushes that through the door potentially.
So that brings me to another point, and that point is that organisations that have not been registered, and it's not their fault, are still getting letters from Charity Services saying, if you can't tell us why you've not been re-registered, you are going to be dropped from the charities register within a certain period of time. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's coming from a good starting point, as in it's part of that same goal, right, of making sure that as many as possible of societies who intend to keep operating are re-registered. So I would hope in most cases, that societies that get that letter have a response to it that will assure Charity Services that the wheels are in motion, they are working through restoration. I think restoration is likely to be a sort of 6 to 8 week process. So, I mean, absolutely, if you were dropped off the register of charities with no comms and no opportunity to speak for yourself, that would definitely raise some fairness issues. But I think in this case, what is intended is to make sure that any societies that have actually ceased to exist at all are not left on the charities register, and those who are just working through this messy administrative process are communicating with Charity Services.
Can I ask you a question about going to a lawyer? If you have no funds and things like that, is it a reasonable suggestion that they could go to community law?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of societies have been doing that through this process. And there's some really good material on Community Law's website about what is this new act and what do we do. They've also got lots of good resources about charities law in general. So yeah, for sure, for those societies that just don't have the resources, and I appreciate that legal fees can rack up really fast too, I think community law is a great starting point.
And I think they're free, aren't they?
I imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Before the registration date came up, and the company's office started putting signs saying you can always apply to be restored, we were aware that within the legislation you could only be restored under certain circumstances. There are about 3 or 4 main points. And now that didn't come up in the notices that the company's office put on their website. It just said apply to restore and pay the money. It didn't say you will only be restored under these particular circumstances. So is there, do you think, a possibility that a lot of groups apply for restoration and then the company's office says, oh, you don't fit into the legislative requirements to be restored, when they gave the impression everyone could apply for restoration? What's your thoughts on that there, Lou?
My understanding is that if it's as simple as you were carrying on operations at the time you were removed and simply failed to re-register, you will be able to work through the process of restoring, which involves, proving that you were operating for a start, having a compliant constitution, giving various updated information and paying a fee. I think the Companies Office probably held back from saying, if you don't make it to the deadline, we'll allow you to restore, because that would have disincentivized everybody from trying to get re-registered. Certainly, there are specific grounds if your society was party to legal proceedings or if it was in liquidation at the time, which have carried over from the earlier 1908 Act. But from all the material that I have seen now on the Companies Office website and the way the form to apply for restoration works, as long as you can prove your society was operating at the time that it was removed for failing to re-register, there shouldn't be a barrier to restoration, except a time delay. By the sounds of it, they've indicated 6 to 8 weeks of limbo, essentially, while you're waiting to have that restoration application approved.
And my understanding is that charity services aren't giving you that time.
Well, I think they might be wanting to hear from you very promptly. But I imagine if you're saying to them, here's proof that we've submitted an application for restoration, we're now in the hands of the Companies Office. I think it would certainly not make sense for charities to forge ahead and deregister you while the wheels are in train. It will just be a matter of being able to prove that you've applied for restoration.
Okay. One last question for you before we go to Rachel, and then we've got a bunch of questions for her, and of course questions from you guys. So this question is one that came up, and I think when I was chatting to you the other day, and that's about if you haven't fixed your constitution and sorted your incorporated society out, you'll need to get together and you'll need to have meetings to sort out what you're going to do. My question is, and it comes from our discussion, if your organisation has been dropped from the charities register and it therefore no longer exists, how do you have a meeting, a legal meeting?
That's really about being clear that it's not the society, the legal entity having the meeting. It's the group of members who intend to restore the society having that meeting amongst themselves. There is also another avenue in which another party can apply for restoration. So, like a member or a creditor to the society. So, there's other ways to cut that cake. But in general, if it's the people who used to be the committee wanting to hold a meeting of what used to be the members, it's really just about being clear that is those people personally meeting with the view of deciding this will be our new constitution and submitting the application.
That's really helpful. And I'm sure some people will come back with some questions further on that. Rachel, you're up.
Right.
Actually, do you know, either of you, how many organisations are currently in limbo?
I do.
Yep.
Well, I do as at the 6th of April. There's not been, so we obtain bulk data out of the Companies Office, which anyone can request to receive. You just have to say what the purposes are that you're requesting it. So as at the 6th of April, there were about 1,800 that had not re-registered, but there's about another 300 that seem to be caught in limbo. So they appear on an earlier spreadsheet and then don't appear on this next spreadsheet. And I'm wondering if those are ones that got their application in time, but it's not been processed. The legislation does allow a 28-day kind of period for ones that made it in but hadn't yet been approved. So if you add those together, that's just over 2,000, but the actual stats seem to show about 1,800. Which
it's a lot better than 9,000, which we had earlier on.
I was just going to say it's a lot, obviously, and any is too many, but there must have been a massive scramble in those last weeks to get down. It was looking like it would be 5,000 or more not long before the deadline.
Right. Actually, before we go on to you, Rachel, I might just stop at this point and see if there's any questions from our participants here. And there is one that I see here that I'd just like to ask. And this is from Lynn. As an advocate for the Hauraki district, part of the Hauraki District Council, is there any way of identifying societies in the district that haven't re-registered so as to be able to try and make contact with them?
Yeah, so that's where the bulk data might be useful. You can obtain it through the Companies Office website and you can choose what registers you want. So actually you can get it for all of them, like the companies register and things as well. You just have to be clear if you intend to use it for sort of business purposes or not. And then what you actually end up with is a file that they fill every however often. So that might be the way to do it. If you can get that bulk data, you can sort it. It will show you everyone who's registered and deregistered and all the way back to the beginning of time, probably. So you'd be able to, if you knew keywords or things like that, to search through there.
Mm.
So you'll note that Paddy's been putting links up in the chat for you. He put up the link for community law and he's put up the link for the companies register. Is there any other questions at the moment for Lou before we carry on? All right, if you think of them, throw them up there and we'll stop and have a look at them. Okay, so Rachel, what's been happening in the terms of banking clients? Specifically, I know you can only probably speak to the BNZ, but let's hear.
Yeah. Well, look, even just following on from that last comment, we are aware of a number of councils. I certainly know the Auckland one reached out to any incorporated societies they had on their books who had leases to let them know that that would be impacted if they didn't re-register. So not sure if other councils followed suit, but that's certainly one thing that I had seen in that space. Coming back to kind of our clients who didn't deregister or
Who didn't
didn't
register.
register, yeah, so we kind of looked at two. We either looked at whether they re-registered or deregistered and went on to do something else. And of those, a very small handful didn't get across the line. And it's quite split down the middle. Half of those were really inactive clients. And once a client's inactive for over 5 years, then their money goes into an unclaimed monies process. But it kind of means that half of them had been inactive for probably more than 6 months, which means very limited or no transactions on the account. Having said that, 50% of them were more active, and so those are the ones that we are hearing from now. And what we are finding, there's quite a mix in there. So there are some, I've got a couple, you mentioned it earlier, with legal disputes that they're just kind of working through where to next. A few that, in your phrase here, had, like in that scramble to the end, didn't get across. A lot of them have made contact and have talked us through where they're at and what they're doing and have something in place. And then a few others we haven't yet heard from. So that's kind of where they're sitting at the moment.
So leading up to the deregistration process, it was very interesting looking at the different banks and what they were doing. For a start, you guys were the only guys who we're aware of who actively got a team together and actively tried to contact your clients who were incorporated societies. And we did ask, we sent out a letter. I think we only got 2 replies to the other banks saying, are you doing anything about informing your incorporated societies about what will happen if they don't deregister? So I just want to go through briefly. If you didn't re-register, you not only could lose access to your bank accounts, you also lose access to your assets. So for example, we know that that was an issue for some amateur sports groups who might have club rooms and things like that. But you also lose the ability to, and this is something you just mentioned, continue with your contracts. Oh, that's interesting. Thanks, Judith. So when you're talking contracts, that's what you were alluding to before, because the whole issue is that once you are no longer a legal entity, you no longer have control of your money or your assets. You're just a group of people. You're not the people who originally signed up for a contract. You're not the people who bought the club rooms. You're not the people who had the bank account. And there are other other things that you're affected to by as well. So uh, for people who are on the Zoom and listening, if you're not aware of that, I just sort of thought it was quite important to bring up the devastating effects of not registering just because you couldn't be bothered or just because it wasn't the right thing. So
I could leap in there, Ros. There's even a possible employment consequence there. There's a
yes, because
question
those are
about
employment contracts.
yeah, there's a question about whether a situation becomes a technical redundancy if the employer doesn't exist anymore. So, it's one of those things, there's all sorts of, once you scratch this bit, another thing might come. And it's so nuanced to what each society is doing and what it had as its operations and, its commitments and things before the deadline.
So, Judith, can I ask you a question? You're saying here that ASB contacted you beforehand.
Yes, yeah.
Yep. Why is it when they contacted you beforehand, 2 emails and a phone call, that it didn't happen?
What didn't happen?
Your re-registration.
Oh, no. The banks contacted us to let us know that we needed to re-register and could we please let them know what we were doing, whether we were intended to re-register or not. And
Yeah.
so we responded to those emails. The phone call came when I was at a wedding on the Saturday.
All right.
In the middle of a wedding, and
Mm.
she was, and the woman concerned was just concerned that we might not be aware that we had to re-register.
Right.
But then I definitely,
Because you guys definitely got your stuff together and were ready to go,
yeah,
probably
absolutely.
4 days before.
Oh, yeah, 4 days before, on the Monday before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So now we'll chase back to you, Rachel. But please remember, if you have any points or questions that you want to make, just go to chat. So the next question is tied in with this, and that is, are you aware of any other banks who have done the same thing as you guys did? Were other banks onto it with their incorporated societies? Do you know?
Look, I did do a quick Google to see, and we kind of kept track as we do. It was really hard to know, and we just really have to focus on what we can do. I guess part of our strategy was, how do we help community organisations stay compliant and keep operating? And we made sure that we had process in place for our own clients, but knowing that some of the work we're doing behind the scenes with various organisations to get the message out. And we did get a bit of press, and hopefully that encouraged some others that perhaps didn't bank with us to get across the line as well.
I know that I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I know that Westpac copied basically what you'd done and put out on their own website, basically what you had on your website, but they did it quite late. You guys started quite early, so thanks for that. That's really great. So I was talking to someone the other day about this whole issue, and they said, oh, but BNZ blocked a whole lot of organisations' accounts before the re-registration date. I wondered if you could talk to us about why you did that and what the effect was.
Yeah, and it kind of tags back into Lou's comment around the numbers. We set up the not-for-profit team over a year ago, and we had been pulling data from MB the whole way through and, making sure that we had our own ducks in a line. But we became increasingly concerned that just such a significant number of incorporated societies just wouldn't get across the line. And if they didn't take action beforehand, those consequences after would be that, significant, as we've discussed, but also they wouldn't be able to restore quickly. We were already knowing that that time frame was going to be long, that there'd be some costs involved. So we did take quite a proactive step to ensure that they could stay compliant. It was very much a temporary block with the idea that people could then let us know what they were doing. And this is particularly for organisations. So at the larger end of town where we have a relationship, we know the person, we could absolutely get in touch with them, and we did. But for those smaller ones where offices have changed over time, we were struggling to get in touch, this was the kind of last lever we could pull to get them to make contact with us. And through that process, we had a number who were unaware, a number who had changed an address or changed a name, but actually hadn't re-registered. And so it did enable that, and it certainly got a lot of media attention, more widespread that we know, got a few people across the line as well. So look, it was always designed to be quick. We could take it off as soon as they contacted us, but the idea was if we did it then, people still had enough time to put some action in place and change and get re-registered, which is really our goal.
Right. Yeah, it was a really interesting tactic, and I think maybe misunderstood by some people. But I thought it was a great tactic, because if you go in, you can't get your money, you're going to want to know why straight away, and that's the opportunity for the bank to say, this is what will happen if you don't do it now. If you don't re-register, we're not going to be able to do anything about that. And that brings us directly to another question, and it's to you, Rachel. What advice would you give to societies, this is from Roseanne, on the process to regain access to their bank account once they've been restored to the register?
Oh, yes. Look, this is once they've been restored, it's for us very easy. So we've got a couple of ways. You can contact us through the normal 0800 line, or even on our www. If you go to the Incorporated Societies page, we created a soft form right throughout the process, so clients can go in, they can let us know what they're doing, and they can then provide that information, and we can restore it straight away. So as soon as we see that evidence, we'll absolutely restore it straight away.
So that brings me to a question that we couldn't answer earlier. And that is, if an organisation loses access to their bank account or to their assets and all that sort of thing, where does the money go? What happens to the asset?
Oh, yes, I have had this question a few times over my career. It just stays sitting there.
So it's like unclaimed monies.
Yeah. And no, it still sits there under the organisation, and it is sitting there until whatever's made. So under this change, I think they can restore up to 7 years out. There is some other legislation, and those will definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but we have one which is a normal process for all clients. All banks follow it, unclaimed monies. If nothing is done over the course of 5 years, then it's passed off to IRD and they can claim through there. But until then, it still sits there under their name. We don't move it or do anything with it. It sits there. In terms of things that we do look at, is we were very closely monitoring any clients that had lending facilities with us that would be that potentially could be impacted. All of those were restored or changed, re-registered, or dealt with before the change, which was great. But that was one that we were preparing a letter to go to the register around those clients if they didn't, just to make sure that we were noted against it. So that is one where, depending on what they've got, you might have some other things, but the reality is it sits there under that name until we know what's happening. The only other thing I'd probably add is, of course, if when you've restored, you've then changed your name, your offices, then that would also need to be updated as well. But all of that kind of information we've got, you can go to the BNZ site, even if you're not with BNZ, and you would see what I would largely expect most banks would need to action some of those changes.
What happens to buildings or land? Lou, do you know that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not, so this is not like the Companies Act regime where if a company is deregistered, the assets are forfeited to the Crown. So there's no kind of automatic forfeit thing going on. What happens to land to achieve a change of ownership is probably going to be one of those things where they have to work through the court on a case-by-case basis, because there's real limitations to trying to change ownership of land that's owned by an entity that doesn't exist. If the entity is restored, that's really straightforward. If the entity is morphed into something new, there's steps to work through there. If the entity simply doesn't exist anymore, that's even more complex. So I think that land's not going anywhere while it sits, on the land information system and says it's owned by Society X. But at the time that anyone wants to come and deal with that land, whether that's sell it or lease it or whatever, especially I suppose if there's an active lease on it in either direction, leased out or leased by, that's going to need case by case attention and could be potentially quite complex, because the registrar has powers to an extent to make directions and then kind of inform the registrar of land about those directions, but there will be limitations there where a party simply doesn't exist anymore.
So that brings up the interesting point that basically to get your land stroke organisation together, they might need to go to court, but they can't get access to their money.
Hopefully, though, all of these things are evidence of we were in operation at the time we were removed. We had land that we leased out, or we were leasing a property, or we had bank accounts that had money coming in and out of them. Ideally, all of that is sufficient to show the registrar we were still operating at the time you removed us. We just didn't cross the line in time. We now apply for restoration. So that the times where there's going to be court involvement will be where there isn't a body that can apply for restoration, because they don't exist and didn't exist for some time, before the deadline. I would have thought in most cases, if you were to some degree active, you should be able to apply for restoration.
I mean, talking to Gordon Noble Campbell, who's the chair of Amateur Sports Association, he was saying that the issue with a little amateur sports group who might have club rooms and things like this is that the majority of people who join up to their incorporated society to join the club, they're actually not the slightest bit interested in whether the club's registered or not. They go there because their kids play rugby or because they're interested in playing sports themselves. And when someone says to them, you should be on the board of our club room, a lot of people go, no, I'm not here for that. I'm here to play sport. So there's a gap in understanding between what the legal requirements are of having an incorporated society necessarily and why people are in there. So it's hard to get people to understand. And I would say if this is a situation your organisation is in, you definitely need legal advice. Don't try and do it yourself. Go to a lawyer and get a lawyer to help you. That's because it does sound complex. Tracy says, I know of organisations who didn't re-register as they were not active, but have money in bank accounts. So what options are open to them? Either of you?
Yeah, happy to start, and Lou might have an opinion as well on this one. Look, I think to start with, if they had money in their accounts, it probably comes back to, well, what are they doing now? Is it they're becoming a different entity? Is it, no, actually the money's been sitting there? Are they one of these clients that I talked about that actually haven't used the account for forever? It is tricky because, they have now lost that legal entity status. We were certainly encouraging clients to either re-register or deregister or, do whatever they wanted to do because they had control to do that. I think a lot of these ones will depend a bit more on the specifics, and I'd encourage them to, if they're with us, then fill in that form and kind of do that. We had a couple of clients and it was just dealing with the mass rush at the end where we had instruction, we knew they'd been clear with us about what needed to happen, but just for whatever reason it wasn't possible, and we have been able to act on some of those because it was already in train and well advised. I do think these are the ones that it's a little bit more tricky, and it's probably case by case is what we're working through. Lou, you might have some thoughts.
Well, I guess too, my question would be about what they weren't active kind of looks like. If that's an organisation that really has no reason to keep operating and hadn't been prior to the deadline, it probably then comes back to what their constitution or their governing document says. If they're in a position where they're essentially winding up, what and have now obviously been forced sort of to do so. But what does their constitution say about what happens with surplus money? Because usually that will need to go somewhere, and it's often somewhere quite specific as set out in the constitution. And then the process to follow that is going to be quite case by case as to whether it is a society that can restore simply for the purposes of then winding up and dissolving properly, or whether, it's more complex, they're not in a position to restore and those funds do need to be distributed somewhere.
Well, sorry, it's Tracy here, Louisa. Thanks for that. So if they didn't re-register, because and a couple that I know of, they had sort of seen this deregistration processes of, we're going to wind up anyway and we would deregister, so that's just going to do it for us, not thinking through the actual implications of having a couple of $1,000s in the bank account.
Yes.
So given that they are deregistered, now the wind up clause, yes, says where they want the money to go, but that document is in effect, that's not even a valid document anymore, is it?
I think you'd have a hard time working through with a bank to get them to move money on the instruction of people who are not authorised to instruct the bank anymore. It's the tricky bit. The intention of the constitution would remain valid, but there's nobody authorised to give those instructions about where the money would go. And I think what you've pointed out, I think that might be reasonably common amongst that 1,800 or so who thought, we don't really need to be here as societies anyway, we'll just not do anything and we'll fall off the register. But where they've got any assets or liabilities, it hasn't finished the process for them. So some of those, it might be that it's worth the exercise of restoring to the register to be able to work through properly winding up and distributing that money out.
Yeah. And with
Tracy, can we see you?
You can. Go.
Great, thank you.
The very fact that they've got money in a bank account, would that help demonstrate that they're kind of active?
I would have thought so. I haven't tested that yet with actually submitting a restoration application, but looking at the form, it says attach evidence, any documentation that shows the society was operating at the time it was dissolved. Examples include financial transactions, meeting minutes, or legal documents. So I think if you had things like bank statements, if you had even meeting minutes where they said we thought about restoring, we thought about re-registering, and we decided we didn't need to, if they met 12 months even, or 6 months maybe before. So I don't know yet what the registrar will accept as evidence, but those are the sorts of things you'd be wanting to show and see.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you both. Thanks, Rachel.
Are there any other questions at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Louisa, what would be the normal period of time that it would take for an organisation to appropriately cease? So, if we help them come back into a legal state, and I'm thinking about ones that do have some assets, I'm just curious about the potential of liabilities that they may own. Is there a period of time that is usually given that is in is it 6 months, is it 12 months that they need to be in this sort of hibernated state? Like, just some direction on that would be good.
It's hard to say because it's quite dependent on what their assets and liabilities are. Probably the thing I would think is things to do before you wind up would be any tax liability that they might have, although I guess many of them will be charities or will have other tax exemptions. But it's however long it takes to discharge everything that they have. So pay off any debts and distribute out any funds, and then when they're sure that all those assets and liabilities are dealt with, to wind up. So it might be 12 months, to bring you to the end of a financial year. I wouldn't think it's years and years for sure, but that's probably a bit fact dependent as to whether it could all be dealt with within 3 months because you're right up near the end of the financial year, and then 6, or need for it to be slightly more than 12 months.
Yeah, and remember that you're dealing with government, and nothing is sure when it comes to timing and solving issues when you're talking about a government department. It's just me on the side. Hope there's nobody from government sitting here going, that's not true, but that's our experience.
Yeah. I think on that, Ros, too, we had a number of clients who were taking the opportunity to change and, just change their structure. And some of them have, as a result of that, now, I know they can coexist, but these ones were going to a charitable trust, and they were finding that that was taking up to, I had one, it took up to 8 months. So I know it was up to 20. So depending, I think, on what you're doing, what is part of this, where you're going, has an impact as well.
Well, if we talk about a charitable trust for a moment, there was some confusion, I believe, at the company's office because some people wanted to move to a charitable trust with the same name, and they were told by the company's office that you couldn't do that, which is actually not true. They can move to, but what they've got to do is you have to keep your incorporated society going. And if you were going to do that, you still had to register your incorporated society, re-register it. And then when you got over the hurdle of that, then you could do the wind down and transfer your funds to the charitable trust of the same name. But so if anybody's had a bit of a problem with that, the issue is really that you can't not register and become not an entity and then say, we want the money to move, because you've lost your rights over that money. So you had to re-register at the time when you were looking at this change. You still had to re-register your incorporated society. It sounds complicated. Is that clear enough? Yeah. Lynn says she's been advised of a local society that have not re-registered, but have apparently been advised by the company's office that they have more time. Can you confirm if whilst they're in this extended time, do they have access to funds? So there's a question for you, Rach.
Yeah, this is interesting because I'm trying to think of the scenario, but someone called me about this week, and there were a few that I'm not sure what happened, but they have been advised. And what the ones that we know of have been given this extension, what they've actually done is re-registered and told them how long they've got to do that. So yeah, look, I can't remember the scenario as to how it happened, but I do know that isn't the first time I've heard of this. But what we are seeing is for these ones, if you go into the company's office, you can see them showing as registered currently, and they know that they've got that time frame. Yeah.
So one from that, it's worth trying to get hold of the company's office and to plead your case.
Yes,
definitely
and have a
worth
look.
it.
You should be able to see it on the register, but if they've been told that, then I would expect that they've got something from the company's office. So yeah, I'd be going, what is the source document of that? Was it over the phone? And then yeah.
So you have to do a bit of your own research, but definitely call up the company's office or go, email them and see if you can make your case, I'd say. Now, I've had an experience where I've been talking to people in government and sort of bemoaned the case of how incorporated societies have been trapped in this. And they are not terribly sympathetic. So what they're saying is, we've given incorporated societies 4 years. We've given them lots and lots of information. And you guys, we know, have been pushing it out. We know legal people have been pushing out the need to do this. There's been a wash of information about the need to do this by the 6th of April this year. And their basic understanding is, if you haven't done it and you've been deregistered, then you probably shouldn't have been an incorporated society and working in this way anyway. I think that's a very hard line to take, not understanding the kind of organisations and the people who are in incorporated societies up and down the motus. So they see it as a basic failing of governance. That's how they've said it to me. So I just want to say, if your organisation has a problem with good governance, there are lots of places you can go to learn about it. Are you there, Paddy?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Do you want to have a brief talk to our attendees about Tick for Governance program?
Excuse me, my apologies. So one of the main causes of fecal matter hitting the rotating blades when it comes to governance has been on community network Aotearoa's sort of mind over the past while. And so 3 years ago, we decided to get the ambulance to the top of the cliff. So I'm going to post a link very shortly. We have a really affordable, easy to do online Tick for Governance course, 10 modules. They cover things from our first module, which is around engaging with Māori and Te Tiriti. We ask all those difficult questions around, should we be doing karakia? How do we find the iwi that are local to us? And all of the other modules around governance essentials, basically governance 101, to help you be more compliant, to understand the finances, the policies,
Legal
procedures, and
stuff, yeah.
strategies and things. And you also get an accreditation as well with that, through NZQA. So I'm going to put the link in there if you want to have a look at it. And I'll also put my email address if you want to know more. But it's about supporting the sector and making sure that the governance is well educated, is compliant. Because a lot of these people are volunteers. They do it of their own free will, which is an amazing amount of billions of dollars go into our economy from the volunteer and community sector. So I will pop that in right now.
Yeah, thank you. Now, we're coming close to the end, so I just was wondering if Louisa or Rachel had anything further that you felt was really important, or if anybody had any final questions.
The only other thing I was just going to note is that as part of the restoration process, the request for restoration gets publicly notified. So there is a period of 20 working days in which the public can make an objection to a society being restored. I don't see that being much of an issue for most societies, but it is just worth flagging. It's not quite as simple as send a form in and get a tick. It does have to go through that 20 working day process, and that's part of the 6 to 8 week timeframe that the registrar's office is advertising.
Can you clarify for me, Lou, that while you're deregistered, somebody else could come in and grab your name?
Yeah, and there are a few societies that I've worked with where that actually could be a live issue. By their nature, societies often have or clicks or those. Occasionally, there is really kind of hot property in the name of an organisation, and that if that were to happen and someone was to establish a new society using a deregistered one's name, it does unravel all manner of complexities, including around intellectual property and all that sort of thing. So that unfortunately can't be avoided. It is a period of public notification, and that could happen. I think if that were an issue for any of the people on this call or anyone that they know, sorry to plug it again, but that's a have to get legal advice situation, because some of the stuff, it's so nuanced, and even we as lawyers, we're treading this territory for the first time. So we're doing it with you, but some of this there's not yet any established answer for.
Yeah, and I just think from a boring banking perspective, if in this process, in terms of whether you have re-registered or deregistered or are now restoring, there's a couple of just key things. One is if you've changed that entity type, it's worth talking to the bank to make sure that they have got that captured correctly, that we understand what's going on and who should be signing and not signing and all that kind of thing. And even if you haven't made those changes, but you have changed your officers, again, some of, I think, the issue in terms of being able to reach the right people, is that it was actually a struggle to find who those people were if we hadn't been kept up to date. So, that is in all banks, I imagine, standard terms and conditions say, let us know when things change, and they can use that form definitely through www to let us know at the moment. And it's certainly something I just always encourage. It comes back to Paddy's piece around good governance and knowing who can do what, and the bank knowing who can do what as well.
So, Paddy, I'm going to call you back. He keeps disappearing on us. Paddy, do you want to talk about the political panel?
Certainly. One of the main things we want to do is to highlight the value of the sector, but also what's happening in an election year. So on Tuesday, the 12th of May this year in Wellington at the BNZ Centre, they're our location, which is fantastic. Thank you very much, Rachel. We'll be hosting 6 representatives from all the major parties, apart from Te Pāti Māori, who are unable to send somebody. And we have the wonderful political journalist, Jehan Casanada, who will be asking questions around what's going to happen after the election. What's the direction for our sector of community and volunteers in the next couple of years? We'll be deep drilling down into what their parties are bringing to the party, what they're bringing to the policies, and their responses to the heavy compliance we're under, the heavy barrage of legislation that we've been under the last couple of years. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation. If you're in Wellington, you can be there by going to our Humanitics page, and I'll post that link. If you're not in Wellington,
it's free, by the way.
We are live streaming it as well, so you'll be able to get in there and have a listen to what those people in the beehive are doing. So
what they're thinking about our sector. It's really hard to sometimes gauge what political parties think about our sector, and I'm not fibbing to you if I say that a lot of them their attitudes are based on disinformation. So let's have a listen to what they have to say. So, you can just sign up on Humanitics so we know our numbers, but it is free. And it does start with drinks and nibbles.
And a big thank you also to Sue Barker, who is currently in this room as well, who is our partner in this wonderful event.
Yes, thank you to Sue. She's incredible. Thank you. And now on our way out, one final thing I'd like Paddy, don't go away. I'd like Paddy to just quickly tell you about our conference.
There's actually one question from Roseanne.
Oh,
Rachel,
I haven't seen that.
In the chat. We might just quickly address that.
Yeah, and I can address that pretty quickly. Look, the questions around if the society has changed to a charitable structure, charitable trust structure, do they need to open a new bank account? It will depend on the bank. So we have got some risk sign-offs here, so we can amalgamate that account number over and then just change who signs on it, that kind of thing. Just use the web form. And you'll be able to do it that way, but it ultimately will depend on the organisation that you're banking with and their own rules and regulations. Yep.
So we've just got another question, have we got? Oh no, it's just Paddy putting stuff up about our conference. Do you want to talk to that very quickly?
Sure thing. Every 2 years, CNA does a sector-wide conference bringing together government, organisations, all the relevant people to talk about what's happening and where we're going. This year's one is in partnership with the New Zealand Christian Council of Social Services. And it's called
the New Zealand Council of Christian Social Services.
Thank you. I always get, I'm very dyslexic about that title. This is called Connecting for Change. We're looking at how do we work better? How do we collaborate? How do we help each other? How do we move forward with the world that we are in now? And we have some wonderful presenters. Max Rashbrook is one of them, as well.
Our MC is Murray Edridge from, most people know Murray, yeah.
Yeah, and with the Honourable Tracy Martin, we have people from Creative Waikato, all coming together from different aspects, around like a Rubik's Cube of perspectives to talk about how we work together. We have presenters, we have workshops, and we are located in Wellington on the 28th and 29th of July this year. And you can see the link there and pop in and going. We're about to launch our program, so you can see who's speaking on what. And we'd love to see you there if you can make it.
Thanks, Patty. So as we leave, I hope that everybody has a great day. If you're from Wellington, I hope that you're dry and warm. It has been miserable, and it's really been quite an effort for people to get into work, and some people have been really affected by this huge weather event. But that's what's been happening across the country with multiple weather events. So minds and thoughts are with everybody who's suffered through these times. And I want to say a especially big thank you to Louisa and Rachel. They're both mates of ours. We see them as partners with us in the work that we do. Especially would like to thank you both for the time that you've given and the information that you've freely and welcomely given to us all. We really appreciate all the things that you do and how you help us. You're both lifesavers, so thank you very, very much. See a lot of people there also saying thank you. Thank you for the information, and keep listening out. We will have another Sharp Strategies Zoom coming up in about 2-3 months, and it will be you'll just keep your eye out for it. It'll be relevant. It'll be about what's going on, and it'll be of help to you all. So keep your eyes on that one. So thank you.